welcome to a brand new episode of Discovering Game of Thrones. Today, the episode I'm going to be talking about is, again, as usual, pardon my language, but Cripples, Bastards, and Broken Things. And, you know, this is just kind of a giveaway, but one of my favorite parts of this episode is the title, and you'll see why, you know, a little bit later on, but let's get right into it and talk about my favorite parts of this episode. And as usual, there are quite a few, so let's get into it. But my first one is Bran's dream. More specifically, the three-eyed crow that is in the dream. And I can only assume, as always, when it comes to the books, but I assume that maybe this is a little bit explained a little bit more, perhaps, in the books. Or maybe not, since it's the dream of a child, or, well, not a child exactly, but, you know, a younger boy. But I'm curious as to the significance of the three-eyed crow. Like, is the crow perhaps, a symbol for, I don't know, one of the kingdoms? I don't think that's been mentioned yet, and I haven't seen anything about a crow, but it's just something off the top of my mind. Or like a house, basically. Like, is there a certain house that is a three-eyed crow? If that's the case, I guess I'll find out later. But I'm legitimately curious as to what the three-eyed crow symbolizes. And of course the fact that Bran was able to walk around during that dream was obviously rather significant. And I remember watching and being like, wait a minute. So I basically immediately knew either it was perhaps a flashback of sorts or a dream sequence. And I was right about the dream sequence, obviously. But moving on to my second favorite part of this episode, Hodor. And the reason why I say this, well, there's a few reasons. Number one, it's one of those things that was just impossible to avoid, having not watched the show until now. But I've seen all kinds of memes, jokes about Hodor. You know, basically all he says is Hodor. And then also apparently there was a recent episode, as of this time, again, this is being recorded in 2016, but a rather recent episode that involves Hodor that is apparently rather significant. I did my best to avoid, again, as many spoilers as possible. All I know is it involves Hodor, no idea what it is. And if you spoil that for me, you're getting blocked. Just saying. I'm going to say that now, and that's true for basically any of the major spoilers for this show or any other Discovering show. You know, a few minor spoilers here or there, no big deal. Again, there are certain things that are just impossible for me to miss. Or basically impossible for me to not have heard, you know, being on the internet. But, you know, significant things like that I don't know, don't tell me. Okay, but moving on to my third favorite part of this episode. And this might seem a bit weird at first, but Samwell Tarly. And it's just because this is a character that I have seen pictures of, know nothing of him, and his personality is not what I expected. Not what I expected at all based on pictures I had seen before. I expected him to be a little bit goofy, perhaps, but not exactly the way he's portrayed here in the show. But overall, I am interested to see how Sam develops throughout the show, for however long he may live in the show. But also, one of the reasons why I consider him a favorite is because it gave another opportunity for Jon to show just how much of a badass he is in this show. Because he stood up for him. He knows that being associated with a coward or a weakling is going to reflect negatively upon him, at least as far as the others' view of him goes. But he just doesn't care. He does his best to protect Sam, while also admittedly being realistic. He's just like, why didn't you attack? Why didn't you fight back? So he is, again, it's like, he's being helpful, but at the same time, he is being realistic about it. I guess subtly is telling Sam he expects more, as, I guess the others are in their own way, kind of. I'll get to that in a little bit. But moving on, my fourth favorite part of this episode is the fact that we get some actual information about the background of Ser Jorah Mormont. And not only from, well, actually, hold on a second. I have watched another episode ahead, so I want to make sure I don't get information mixed up. But yeah, we do at least get that bit of information about him explained to Daenerys, which I really enjoyed, and I'm looking forward to seeing the pasts of several different characters explained, hopefully, or at least put into some greater detail. Because, again, like Ser Jorah Mormont, he's been there since the first episode, I believe. Maybe just the second, but still. Just now, finally, getting this tiniest bit of background information about him. And I'm looking forward to more, admittedly. Again, at least until he possibly dies. But moving on. My fifth favorite part of this episode actually involves Viserys, or Viserys. I'm going to go with Viserys, because I think that's right. But there's a scene with him where he wasn't horrid. At first. And you probably know what scene I'm talking about. It's where he's in the tub with one of the ladies. And he seemed human there. He seemed like a relatable human being. He seemed vulnerable to a degree. He seemed like someone that I might actually not want to die in this show for the tiniest bit of time. And then obviously he pushes that away at the end of the scene, and what happens later, which I'll be touching on, believe me. But yeah, just the fact that, again, like Joffrey in the, I believe it was the previous episode? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was. But like Joffrey, it's like, it got this scene, this tiniest hint of humanity from this character that I just can't stand. And then he just kind of washes it away. It's just kind of like, oh, I knew I was right about you. But there you go. So yeah, Viserys, he wasn't horrid at first, for once, in this show. But moving on from there, my sixth favorite part of this episode involves Sansa. And the reason is this, and maybe it's more me sort of perhaps projecting or even reading a little bit too much into it, but some of Sansa's actions in this episode, the way she interacts with, I don't know if she's their nanny or nurse exactly, whatever she is, but she's with the girls most of the time, or at least Sansa. And it's the fact that she seems to be more observant than I thought at first, but also she has this fire inside her. She has this inner strength that shows itself for just a little bit here. Because in the previous episode, Sansa, from my perspective at least, has been just very whiny, very... I would say probably the weakest of the Starks in personality. Again, just my personal observation and opinion. But again, in this episode, the way she speaks and the way she addresses certain people, it gives this... It gave me this vision that there is much more to her than what we're seeing right now, or at least what we've seen before. That she's very observant, because again, she recognizes that that Joffrey doesn't like her. It could just be the fact that she thinks that because of the fact that Joffrey and Joffrey and his family had her direwolf killed, but also I don't know. Again, part of me just feels like that's her being able to read into things maybe a little bit better than I thought she could. That's the direction I'm going in. But again, and also, she has some inner strength. She has this fire inside that seemed hidden from me in the previous episodes, but it did show in just the slightest little bit here, and I think maybe that's the starting of, like, that's just the kindling for the fire that's going to grow, and she's going to become a much stronger, more significant character. Not perhaps in the same way as Arya has strength, where she's, very confident in fighting, wants to be, she doesn't want to be, well, I'm actually going to get to that in a little bit, but she doesn't just want to be another princess, another lady. She wants more. So not the same kind of strength as Arya, but a strength all her own. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that that is true. I apologize if my voice cracks again. I don't have any water to drink. But moving on to my next favorite part of this episode. It's when Ned starts looking into Arryn's death. And it begins this chain of events that I just found intriguing. And I guess I'm sort of going over some of the other favorites that I wrote down here, but oh well, what the heck, I'll try and keep it in order. But when he starts looking into Arryn's death and just talking with different people, and then later we find out that not only is the Queen having people watch Ned very closely and listening to his every word, but so does Littlefinger, and I think at least one or two others. And so it leads to this very, it's in a medieval sense, but a very political espionage kind of culture almost that Ned is having to live in. And Ned is a very honorable and very strong-willed man, but at the same time, the whole idea of all this espionage is, from my perspective, seems to be, far more than he expects. Just from being able, just from what he's doing. Like I don't know. Perhaps I'm talking nonsense here, but just the whole aspect of the kingdom being filled with espionage and spies and secret ears, listening everywhere, hearing all the secrets, which Littlefinger has a huge number of secrets apparently and a huge number of people under his power. But I just all of that stuff that gets triggered from, again, Ned starting to look into Arryn's death, that I find truly intriguing. And from what I've heard about the show, again, even before it started, is that the political aspects of it is going to be a huge aspect of this show. So that's going to be, again, that's going to be something that I don't know, I may enjoy it more than I think I do, because usually I honestly hate politics because politics make people really angry and frustrated. But from the context of this show, I really think it's going to be a good thing. But anyway, I'm going to stop rambling about that because I'm not entirely sure it made sense. Hashtag makes no sense. But moving on, my 8th favorite part of this episode is, it's more of a question, but it's one of my favorite parts because it keeps getting brought up from time to time. And maybe I'm just thick in the head, but the phrase, "the seed is strong," it clearly has some very significant meaning, but I can't tell what it is. Again, I don't know if I'm just being thick in the head here, if I'm just not getting it when it should be very obvious, but there's something about that phrase where it keeps getting brought up that intrigues me. I know it has something to do with what's going on, but I don't know what it is, and I want to know. So that is one of those cases, if I'm just kind of being dumb and overlooking some obviousness, feel free to let me know what that means. The seed is strong in the context of this show. That was loud. But if there is anything, that more to it that might get explained later, then, hold back a little bit. Just hold back. But anyway, moving on to my next favorite part of this episode is Arya's desire to be a lord. Again, she wants more. She's talking to her father, Ned, about what she wants to do. And she asks Ned if she could be a lord one day. And he says, you'll marry a lord, you will have princes, or not princes, but you will have children, and, all this stuff. But Arya says, no, that's not me. That's not good enough for Arya. She wants to be a lord. She wants to be the one in charge. And with the kind of energy and fire that she has in this show already, unless someone kills her, I definitely see it happening. Like, who knows, by the time the show ends, she may be the Lord of Whiterun. That's something of Skyrim, isn't it? I don't know. I think I'm getting my mythologies mixed up. But the Lord of the North, basically. Who knows, that might happen. The show's not over yet at this point, I know, so if she's still alive, maybe there's still the slightest chance. But anyway, moving on from there, my next favorite part of this episode is, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing the name, but Gendry, or Gendry, perhaps? But essentially Ned uses this information that he's found from this book and locates Gendry, who he finds to be one of King Robert's bastard sons. One that he either doesn't know about or doesn't acknowledge, but still, he is there, and Ned finds him, and apparently Arryn had been searching around, trying to perhaps locate the different bastard children that Robert had been having. Yeah. So, and maybe even, perhaps that's what's meant by the seed is strong? That Robert just keeps spreading his seed around and therefore has a lot of children elsewhere in the kingdom. Maybe that's what it is. If so, let me know, but at the same time, I see the potential for some very interesting things to come from Gendry. Again, especially considering how good of I think it was a blacksmith he was. Like, he but he made his own helmet. And it was pretty awesome looking, in my opinion. So, who knows, maybe I'll get to see him in a battle, probably before he dies, knowing the show. But, get to see him in battle, or maybe he'll become a significant character. Again, as with everything, I don't know. But I'm looking forward to the possibility of more from him. But again, moving on to my next favorite part is when Daenerys stands up to Viserys. Oh my god, that was such a long time coming. Such a long time coming. Well, first of all, he dragged her girl, or her servant, back to her camp by the hair. And I know they're acting, but that looked like some legitimate pain the girl was going through. So hopefully that was a one-take kind of deal. Or maybe even that it was fake hair that they were using during that scene. But oh my god, even if it's acting, it didn't look in the least comfortable. But when Viserys gets up in her face and just starts, destroying everything, when Daenerys had been trying to seemingly, make some peace with her brother, who is clearly unstable. He just started attacking her, and she got right back at him and let him know that, basically just told him how things were, shall we say. And I love that scene. Again, mostly because of my severe hate for Viserys. And I really hope he dies. I'm going to mention that more than once through this episode, but I really hope he dies, and I hope he dies soon. But, moving on from there. My next favorite part of this episode is seeing Sam and Jon Bond together. And it was, it was just a fun little scene. A little bit cringeworthy, I have to admit. But just seeing them have that conversation, and Jon having some fun for once. It's like, even when he was back with, his family, the ones that did like him, just like seeing him smile and laugh, it may have happened once, maybe. But, we got an actual laugh, and he was being playful in this scene where him and Sam are cleaning the tables. So I really liked that. I think Jon may be my favorite character, or at least one of my favorite characters in this show. Probably means he's going to die. But just that scene of watching them bond over, some very guy things. I really enjoyed that. Which actually, in that same scene, brings me to my next favorite part. It's the fact that despite how cold and, I would say, ruthless he is, Alliser isn't evil. And this is all from my perspective, admittedly, so I don't know who knows, he may actually be a bad guy. I don't think he is, but again, my interpretation is he isn't evil, he's just a very hard, cold person. He's someone who has lived through frozen hell. 6 months of being outside the wall, having, I guess, almost his entire party slaughtered by the wildlings. And it was just hearing his story. It impacted Sam and Jon, but it impacted me as well, because while watching him, except for maybe the first episode where I met him as a character, he's just been very cold and mean, very drill sergeant-like, which is understandable. He's trying to whip these boys into shape, but that sort of solidified more for me that he's not an evil person. He is just deadly serious. Deadly serious. And so his humor can come out in very dark ways, which is basically making people attack Sam if Sam's not going to try and stand up for himself, because he wants this army to be strong. He doesn't want weaklings there, which is understandable. But again, it's just, I don't know, it helped my perspective on Alliser as a character. And I'm hoping that we will get to see a lighter side to him at some point, or maybe he'll die before that happens. I know I say that for every character, but from what I hear, it's just once you have a favorite character, they die. So, yeah. But anyway, moving on from there, my next favorite part of this episode was the games, or the joust, which it was very short-lived in this episode, admittedly, but mostly it was the fact that we got the story of the Mountain and the Hound. Now, the Mountain is a character that I have at least heard about. I have seen pictures of the actor who could squish me with his thumb, could squish most people with his thumb. So yeah, the Mountain is a very imposing figure. The Hound is, met him before. I didn't care for him previously, but did at least get some information as to his past slightly, and also his apparent, I don't know if you would say love-hate, maybe just hate-hate relationship with his brother, who melted his face in a fire. But yeah, that was just a very during that scene, getting that information, and then also the death of one of the jousters. I feel like I forgot to write his name down. Yeah, but basically the former squire of Arryn, who is now a knight. Just that brutal death. That brutal death scene was insane. Actually, now that I think about it, I am going to be touching on that more, so I'll shut up at this point. But let's move on into my... wait, I'm sorry. I have one more favorite. I apologize, everyone. But my final favorite part of this episode is when Cat has Tyrion captured. And I was pretty much just as confused as Tyrion was when she got up and she started addressing different men within the lodge, or within the pub. Not entirely sure exactly what the place was, but basically when she starts addressing these different men, and then when she, when it was finally revealed at the end, I felt kind of stupid, because I was just kind of like, oh, duh, of course she's going to get them to do that. Because it had honestly slipped my mind about it being Tyrion's dagger that had been used to try and assassinate Bran. So yeah, just that final scene of the episode was a very nice cliffhanger. Not one of the best, I admit, but a very nice cliffhanger, because it was certainly one of those scenes where it seems like one of the final notches was being turned. Like, one of those final turns was being made before things just start to go crazy. Because now, at this point, once the Lannisters find out that a Stark has taken their brother captive, I don't think it's going to go over well. And since I've seen the next episode, I know it doesn't go over well. But that's for next episode. Moving on from there, my annoyances for this episode. And again, although I mentioned that Samwell was one of my favorites for, certain reasons, Samwell, or maybe I should just call him Sam, but Sam seems very cartoony in his weakness and his... I don't know, it's just the way he was acting seemed childish for a 6-year-old, let alone someone that seemed to be at least in their teens, upper teens, I would assume. So yeah, there's just something about his personality in that regard, just like the very weak, and I know cartoony probably isn't the right word, but it's just extremely over-exaggerated goofiness and weakness that it put me off some. And hopefully it's something that will change about the character moving forward, with Jon's help and possibly the others whose names I forget. But hopefully with their help he'll learn to actually be able to fight and stand up for himself and have some strength. Hopefully. But my second and final annoyance with this episode, and this should be no surprise at all, Viserys. I've said it before a few times, going to say it again. He needs to die. Of any character in this show, and seriously, any of them at this point, I want him to die. He needs to go out painfully, ideally, and I don't want to see him in the show anymore. Every scene he's in, I cringe because I'm just thinking, oh God, what now? Because, and that's the one thing, whenever it cuts to where they are, it's like, I see Daenerys, I see Drogo, I see Ser Jorah, that's his name, right? Yeah, Ser Jorah. I see them and I'm just like, oh, okay, awesome. Oh, but wait, what if Viserys shows up? And when he does, I cannot stand him. And I know, dark, probably horrible of me, but I hope he dies. I really, really do. I will feel no sadness over his loss in this show. Depending on what happens to him, I may experience some empathy pains, but overall, I cannot wait for him to be off this show. Cannot wait. So yes, those are all my favorites and annoyances with this particular episode. I apologize for some, disorganization there. I'm going to try and do better in the future, as always. Whether or not I can execute is another story. But, as always, let me know your own favorites and annoyances with this episode in the comments down below. And from there, let's actually move into my quotes of the episode. Yeah, as always, there's just far too many good lines in these episodes to only pick one. I may be more strict on myself in the future and whittle it down to one, but for now, we still have multiple quotes. So, the first one is when Tyrion visits, keep saying Winterfell, visits the north. I'm going to get the name right eventually, I swear. But when he visits there, and Tyrion addresses him as being a cripple, or being crippled, and Bran says, "I'm not a cripple, then I'm not a dwarf." And then Tyrion goes on to, say basically, it's like, I should tell my father, he'll be elated. But there's just something about that back and forth. And again, really just Tyrion in general. He's always going to have probably some favorite of mine in an episode. And just that simple line was perfect. Absolutely perfect. That I'm not a dwarf. It worked so well. So yeah, that's my first quote. My next one is, well, again, from Tyrion. And it's actually very shortly after that bit right there. And it's after Tyrion addresses, or basically gives them the design for a special saddle that that Bran would be able to use, which was pretty awesome. And Robb asks him, why are you doing this? And Tyrion says, I have a tender spot in my heart for cripples, bastards, and broken things. Again, one of the reasons why I love the title of this episode, because it was worked in so well, honestly. It was because, and in a lot of cases where characters and shows will use the title in their dialogue, it feels forced, it doesn't feel natural. This was definitely one of those cases where it felt just natural. Again, given the character of Tyrion, the way he usually speaks is rather poetic, if a bit crude, but having him say that and use the episode's title in his dialogue, it worked so well. It just worked. It worked perfectly, in my opinion. So there. Okay, my third and final favorite quote of this episode is during a discussion between Eddard and Cersei, or Ned and Cersei. I keep going back and forth between what I call him. I'll just call him Ned. But it seems like Cersei is being very, very gracious, very kind, while obviously still having this very dark undertone that has come to be expected from her as a character. But, basically, in the back and forth between them, Ned and then Cersei say, I was also trained to kill my enemies, Your Grace. As was I. And, just the tension in that scene. I honestly almost felt more tension between Eddard and Cersei when they were having that dialogue exchange than between Ned and Jaime. It's probably just about even, maybe more with Jaime in reality, but at least in that scene, oh, the tension was palpable. So, yeah, just so many good quotes from this episode, as well as the others that have come before it. So, man, I don't expect to have only one quote for quite a while, at least. But, moving on from there, I actually don't have a theory for this episode. I did have, as before, a WTF of the episode, and it has to do with what I was mentioning earlier during the games. But Hugh of the Vale's neck piercing, shall we say, when just that huge spike gets run through his neck. And, oh my, I mean, there's plenty of violence in this show, no doubt. There was a lot of blood, no doubt. But there was just something about that scene, seeing it up close and seeing, like, the blood spurt out, not only from the gaping wound that the spike is sticking out of, but also his mouth and just the death rattles, and it was so messed up. And it's also partially a WTF of the episode because I'm curious whether or not that was meant to happen. I don't know, but part of me just feels that way. Again, going back to all the conspiracy and the espionage going on, I can't help but wonder if it was intended for him to die. Perhaps not in that specific way, but someone wanted Hugh of the Vale dead during these games. As usual, I have no idea. Maybe that's my theory for the episode. But, yeah, just, that was a crazy scene. And really, really messed up. But as for my overall thoughts on this episode, it was really good. This episode feels like it's starting to finally get things moving, as we've had so much story building, so much basically so much building going on in the show. And again, throughout this episode, for the most part, there's still plenty of world building going on, a lot more things in the background happening, but it feels like things are starting to escalate, especially with that final scene, again, where Cat has Tyrion captured. It feels like, okay, we're finally putting the foot on the accelerator. That next episode is going to get crazy. And as I said, I've already seen the next episode, so, well, you'll have to wait until the next episode to hear what I think. But, I'm sorry, I'm kind of a spaz. But, I apologize, I forgot that is, I might actually cut that out. So, if I offended anyone saying that, I truly do apologize. But I'm silly. Let's say that. I'm silly. But, coming up next is The Wolf and the Lion, and oh my god, I am so ready to start talking about that episode. I'm ready to start moving forward, watching these episodes and get through season 1, because, after the next episode, I just can't wait to see what happens. I have to keep going forward, and I definitely want to keep going forward with these episodes. So, in closing, as always, everyone, let me know, your own thoughts on this episode down below. Let me know if you think I missed anything, or perhaps I had some, in your eyes, I perhaps had some missteps as far as my thoughts on the episode. Definitely want to know your thoughts on that. Be respectful, as always, please, people. And, yeah, just any of your own favorites, annoyances, quotes, perhaps tracks of the episode, even though I don't know what the tracks are. Maybe mention the scene that this track occurs in, so I'll know where to find it. But yeah, just very much looking forward to getting this moving and ready to record the next episode of Discovering Game of Thrones to get ready for you all. So until next time, everyone, I am Papa Kenn, and I will see you next time for The Wolf and the Lion. Until then, later days.